What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Friday, December 15th, 2017, halfway through the month here, 10 days away from Christmas, for those of you who delayed on your shopping. And we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. So, getting right on into it, the wildfires in California are still out of control. They were claiming to have them 25% contained, but apparently the wind has whipped up again. And they're saying even more areas of California are going to be at risk here. And apparently they have lost a firefighter, a gentleman named Corey Iverson, out of San Diego, was assigned to the fire burning northwest of Los Angeles, which is like the fourth largest in California history. And he was an engineer with the State Fire Engine Strike Team, and he died yesterday. They're not saying exactly how, but I imagine it's probably very, very unpleasant here. All right, let's turn to the domestic political arena, if you will, because the investigators and even some of the media are starting to really come down and take a good look at some of these scandals that they've been trying to distract behind all these other kind of things going on here. So basically, Sean Hannity did a presentation yesterday, and we've linked to it at whatreallyhappened.com, where he basically is out there saying that Robert Mueller and the FBI conspired to cover up the Clinton email matter, and basically Comey is looking at an obstruction of justice charge, and Hannity had guests on his show, Greg Jarrett, not him. He wasn't a guest. But the sum and substance of the program is that Hillary Clinton, James Comey, Huma Abedin should be very worried. And yes, that was by Greg Jarrett. I misread my notes here. So, yeah, in a just and honest system, there would be indictments and prosecutions coming. But again, Hillary Clinton, and Bill Clinton, for that matter, the Bush family, they're fighting to protect their narcocracy because they understand if any of them goes down and makes a deal, it's all going to unravel all the way back to that gun and drug running operation out of Arkansas in the mid-1980s, which was the beginning of the Clintons' rise to untouchable power. So Senator Johnson has sent a letter basically outlining the scope of FBI officials sculpting the Clinton exoneration statement for James Comey. And remember, this was all going down before the investigation was even over with, even before they interviewed Hillary Clinton herself. And they were changing the language to basically make sure they didn't say anything that they felt went over the line on Title 18. They changed grossly negligent to extremely careless, as if that really makes a difference. But extremely careless is not within the language of Title 18. Grossly negligent is. I think the case could be made that being extremely careless and is basically the same thing as grossly negligent. But they did change the wording. So here we had the FBI covering up for Hillary Clinton. And yes, it is obstruction of justice. And some of these people ought to be looking at jail time right now. I mean, this is a serious matter. And the guests that Sean Hannity had on his show, the last question he asked them, is this worse than Watergate? And all of them said, yes. It's much worse than Watergate. It's far more pervasive. It reaches out to more top government officials. Richard Nixon had his little plumber's unit and creep, but he didn't really have that many government officials covering for him. In this case, the Clintons have got pretty much everything inside the swamp is looking out for them. Not because they particularly like the Clintons, but because they know if that narcocracy, if the government-sanctioned drug running comes on out, they're fired. They're going to lose their job. The American people will not sit still knowing that the biggest drug smuggler in the country is the United States government and the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, apparently the snowflakes are already concerned that Robert Mueller might be fired. And at this point, the case is being made. His investigation was clearly biased. It had huge conflicts of interest. The text messages coming out from Peter Strzok are basically saying these people saw it as their mission to save the country from Donald Trump. And so there is a clear case of conflict of interest, and Mueller ought to be let go with his entire team. They haven't really found anything. After all these months and $7 million, they have found zero evidence of Trump-Russia collusion. The only indictments they've handed down are process crimes that could have been run through the Department of Justice without a special counsel, and none of them are connected to the Trump campaign. It's like Mueller bought himself a huge fishing boat, and he's been gone out on the ocean for weeks, and he comes back and he's got a couple of sardines. That's it, to show for all that money and effort. All right, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. So apparently, the far-left group MoveOn.org is planning massive nationwide rapid response rallies that will begin just hours after news breaks of Mueller being fired. So again, they don't get what they want. They're going to go on out and scream and cause a ruckus and try and throw tantrums until they get what they want, which is Hatchet Man Mueller back in his office going after Donald Trump. Now, getting a little bit further into Peter Strzok, and this is an article that came out of the Gateway Pundit, basically talking about how Peter Strzok and probably some of these other people in this investigation, they're suffering from a God complex. And again, Peter Strzok was having an affair with Lisa Page, who was married to somebody else, and they were sending all these texts back and forth about just how much they hated Donald Trump and a lot of other things I can't say on the radio without the FCC coming in and yanking licenses from our affiliates. So they sent so many text messages, it started to look like maybe they weren't getting much work done. But then I guess at that level of the government, hardly anybody has to work here. But basically, the idea that really comes across is their belief, their faith, that they are there to save the country from Donald Trump. And in fact, at one point, Lisa sent a text to Peter Strzok saying, "You were meant to be where you are, to do the work you must do." These people are really caught up in their own ego and vanity. But in point of fact, an investigator at the FBI does not have the job of specifically removing a president to save the country. That's way, way, way above their pay grade. Now, other people are coming on forward. U.S. Representative Jim Jordan was on the Lou Dobbs show and basically says there is clearly was a concerted effort within the FBI to help Hillary Clinton win last year's election. So it wasn't Russian meddling in the election. It was the FBI, along, obviously, with the Democratic National Committee to get rid of Bernie Sanders and the Hillary campaign itself. That's where all the meddling came from. Russia had nothing to do with it. And again, it is not the job of the FBI to influence elections. They have gone way, way, way beyond their job description in this one. Now, Judicial Watch has filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit against the FBI for all records about the removal and reassignment of Peter Strzok. Now, remember, he was the former deputy to the Assistant Director for Counterintelligence of the FBI, and he basically got caught lying about some of his contacts. No indictment, but he was taken off the investigation and transferred over to, as I understand it, a human resources job. But Peter Strzok was in the middle of all of this stuff while it was going down. He was the FBI's second in command of counterintelligence and chief of the investigation into Hillary Clinton's illicit email server. And he was one of the people who interviewed Hillary Clinton on July 2nd, 2016, months after Comey had already crafted the letter saying, she's not guilty, we're going to let her go. And apparently in the wake of the discovery of those text messages with his mistress, he was removed from the job. And it was a huge embarrassment because it does reveal that Mueller's investigation and the FBI investigation are not objective and unbiased. They're very biased. Now, FBI Director Christopher Wray, when he was testifying before Congress, tried to explain it away, saying that, well, it's unreasonable to think people don't have political opinions. And he's absolutely correct about that. Okay, but we expect officials involved in official business to maintain a sense of professional detachment. In other words, to leave their politics at home and just go in, look at the facts, and follow the facts through to find out what happened. Not to come on in and use your office, funded by the taxpayer, to undermine the president the American people voted for last year. Now, also coming from Judicial Watch, they released some documents showing that former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and her top aide, Huma Abedin, were allowed to remove electronic and physical records under the claim that these were personal materials and unclassified non-record materials, including files on Clinton's telephone calls and schedules that were not to be made public. In addition, the documents show that Huma Abedin took 5 boxes of physical files, including records marked Muslim engagement documents. Doesn't sound to me like that's personal material. And all of these records about all of these documents and files removed by Hillary Clinton and Huma Abedin were obtained through a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit. So basically we have Hillary Clinton, who was deleting emails, had classified information, special access compartmentalized information on her private email server. Oh, and by the way, one of the other edits that was done to James Comey's letter to exonerate Hillary, when they were talking about foreign interests accessing Hillary's private email server, it was originally written that it was likely that this had happened. That word was taken on out. They were really trying to soften this thing and make it look like it was no big deal. And that is not the FBI's job, officially. But we know the FBI engages in cover-ups. They were part of the cover-up of the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster. They were part of the cover-up of TWA 800. They were part of the cover-up of the Oklahoma City bombing. They were part of the cover-up of the assassination of Martin Luther King. Go back and read the history of COINTELPRO in the 1960s, and you'll see what the FBI actually does. Like the CIA, it has gone rogue. It sees itself as knowing what's best for the country over the elected civilian leadership, and they're behaving like it. So getting on back to Judicial Watch, they're basically saying, we already know that the Obama State Department allowed Hillary Clinton to steal and then delete her government emails, which included classified information. And these new records show that was only part of the scandal. There was other stuff that was being removed and destroyed that wasn't supposed to be. These new documents show the Obama State Department had a deal with Hillary Clinton to hide her call logs and schedules, which would be contrary to the Freedom of Information Act and other laws requiring the preservation of all documents generated by officials in their official position. So, now then, yesterday I was talking about how this Russian hacker was claiming that Putin ordered him to break into the DNC server. And I made the comment, it sounded like the guy whose lawyer said the FBI had offered him a bribe to make that allegation. As it turns out, this is a second one. So I guess from the point of view of the FBI, if at first you don't succeed, lie, lie again. So last May, there was this other Russian hacker who claimed U.S. officials offered him cash, citizenship, and an apartment if he would accept responsibility for hacking the DNC server, stealing Clinton's emails, and blaming it on Russia. And he refused. And he was then arrested by the FBI under the lead of former Director James Comey, and nobody knows where he's gone. So now they've got another Russian hacker who's confessing that, yes, he hacked the DNC and stole Hillary Clinton's emails under the direction of Russia's FSB. So, again, they're still trying to push that ridiculous idea of Russia hacking the DNC server, when the technical records prove it wasn't an outside hack, it was somebody actually physically present on the server with a flash drive copying the files off. The outside hack job is another government lie. Now, getting on down to what happened in Alabama, Jim Jones came on out and basically said something along the lines of what I mentioned on a phone call, that all of this smear job on Roy Moore was actually just a cover for the fact that they were going to steal the election. It basically gives them a handy reason to explain why Roy Moore, who had been leading in the polls all this time, right up until the last day before the election itself, why he suddenly lost. And they've got an explanation. Well, he was a child rapist. He was all these other things. And again, all of the allegations against him, none were proven, and many of them were completely discredited, such as Beverly Nelson and that yearbook. So it was a complete farce. And thanks to the Alabama State Supreme Court, the records have been destroyed, so there can't be a recount. The only possible save, and I imagine they're working to prevent this from happening, is that apparently foreign and military ballots can still be accepted up until the 19th of this month. And there may be enough of those to swing the election back to Roy Moore, but I can imagine already that there's a big push. No, you can't change the outcome of the election. The American people have to believe the elections are fair and honest. They have to believe the corporate media is accurately predicting and reporting the winner. No, what we need is to really have an honest, fair, and accurate election system. What we really need is a corporate media that actually does report on what's going on, rather than just spin-doctoring everything for the benefit of the rich and powerful. Now, a lot of people have been looking at some of the decisions handed down by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and wondering just what's going on with these people. They have thrown roadblocks in front of Trump's immigration. They've come out with some really kooky, loony decisions, and now it turns out we may have an explanation for what's going on. Alex Kozinski, the chief judge of the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, apparently was maintaining a publicly accessible website featuring sexually explicit photos and videos, which included a photo of naked women on all fours painted to look like cows. The liberals should be upset about that. And a video of a half-dressed man cavorting, to put it politely, with a sexually aroused farm animal. And this judge admitted to the Los Angeles Times that, yeah, he did, and yes, he shared some of this material with his friends because he thought it was funny, but he didn't realize people could just access his webpage over the Internet. Well, yeah, that's what the Internet does. But, I mean, if this is the kind of people they have as judges on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, that goes a long way to explaining some of the harebrained decisions we've seen them hand down. Now, getting on back to this issue of sexual harassment and all of these members in Congress who are being accused, there's a Congresswoman, Marcy Kaptur of Ohio, said that you need to understand the women who are working in the Capitol building, they're dressing provocatively. They've got cleavage so deep it's practically down to the floor, and it's almost signaling, yes, I'm available. So guys are looking at these women dressed very sexily, and they're getting the wrong signal. And they act on the signal, and then all of a sudden they're being accused of sexual assault. And Kaptur goes on to say that, you know, there's effectively a dress code for men in Congress, ties and suits. And maybe there ought to be a dress code for the women in the Capitol building in order to head off any more of this confusion. We're going to take a break for some commercials here, and when we come on back, we've got a caller waiting on the line. Stay tuned. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and we're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Miles in Maine. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. How are you?
Fine.
Hey, I just wanted to know your opinion. What do you think the chances are that the Russians seriously went out on a limb, stacked that Alabama election for Doug Jones?
Nice try. Nice try. No, I don't think it's serious at all. I think all the election fraud that we've actually documented has all been domestic. And again, now we're finding out the FBI was meddling in the elections as well. Somebody meddled in Alabama, and I don't think we have to look too far to find out who. The Democrats are desperate to retake Congress, and we know the Democrats are cheating. We got a ringside seat to some major political shenanigans last year during the Democratic primaries. So let's start with the people. Let's start with the people we know have already committed the crime. It's just like a police investigation. When a crime is committed, the first thing you do is you look at people who've already committed that same crime before.
Yeah, well, we know they even cheat on each other. Just look at Bernie. But the situation is, when do you think Trump will call for this election committee that, he said there needed to be reform and other thing like that, and we haven't heard nothing about it since.
Well, part of that may be that the corporate media is very much in bed with the vote rigging system. That National Tabulation Center Voters News Service, it's not a government office. It's a privately owned company, and it's owned by the major TV networks and 2 major newspapers. So they're actually part of the vote rigging mechanism. So they're not going to report on anything that says our elections are less than honest. Now, at some point, I would like to see this Election Integrity Commission come on out with some recommendations on how to actually fix this, because there are clearly major problems with the way elections are being run in this country. They seem to be set up in a manner to facilitate and then conceal after the fact massive election fraud. That move by the Alabama State Supreme Court, that was the giveaway. When they came on in and stayed the order to preserve all records, that's the moment I knew the election was going to be stolen.
Exactly. And, wouldn't that be sweet if that election, I'm trying to think of the exact name, the reporting services for the elections, wouldn't that be sweet if that was all turned over to the alternative media?
Well, I think we need to come up with an election system that's going to work, and I did describe one in an article on my website, and I've actually gotten emails from around the world saying that's the system we adopted when we got rid of the electronic machines. And then once we have the system, we're going to know how the votes are going to be tabulated. Now, in the case of the system I came up with, we're crowdsourcing the tabulation of the election. There's no central counting authority. Because all results are counted and posted right at the polling places, and then the local newspapers will do the local totals, and the state newspapers will do the state totals, and then the national papers will do the national totals, but everybody can follow the vote from their own polling place right up to the top of the results to make sure that it's accurate. So you're basically going to have hundreds of millions of American citizens validating the election.
Well, that sounds good, Michael. I think that would go a long way in trying to straighten a lot of these issues out. I have one last question, though. I always hear you talk about this Jim guy in Vancouver.
Jim Goddard, yes.
Jim Goddard. Yeah. How do we turn on that show? How do we get to that show? Is there a way to do it?
Basically, it's a pre-record, and he posts the videos on HowStreet.com, and I'll post the videos at WhatReallyHappened.com.
Okay. Thank you very much, Michael. Have a great day.
All right. Same to you. Thank you very much. We're going to let you go. Currently, former Massachusetts State Senator Brian Joyce, who served 9 terms, was arrested and charged with running his official office as a criminal enterprise. He now faces 113 federal indictments, or 113 count federal indictment. That is some serious corruption going on there. And it gets back to a question I keep asking. Is this the best our system can do? There's something fundamentally wrong with our system when somehow people who are this corrupt and crooked keep getting these offices. And that, I think, right there tells us there needs to be an overhaul of the election system. So we're coming up here on a commercial break, and during the commercial break, I'm going to go ahead and repost my article on how to have a much more honest election system, because what we have right now clearly is set up to allow elections to be rigged by the very powerful. And we saw that all last year. And I think the reason that Hillary Clinton got so upset was after all that work to steal the election, she still didn't get it, because the American people voted in enough numbers for Trump to overcome that stolen election advantage. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We got another caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. So, anyway, getting on back to the news here. David Cameron is out there saying that Donald Trump's criticism of mainstream fake news is dangerous. The real enemy is Russian bots and trolls. They're still pushing this whole thing about Russian bots and Russian trolls, and yet the investigations keep finding almost nothing. 75 cents worth of ads on Facebook that reached a total of 200 people. But Cameron is apparently on board with the blame Russia and protect the corporate media. Got to protect the propagandists. Without the propaganda, the ministry of propaganda, we're all sunk, apparently is what he's thinking. All right. Now, getting on over to the war zones, and there are plenty of them. The Syrian army has tightened the siege on Beit Jin pocket, and it's an operation against the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which was formerly Jabhat al-Nusra, the Syrian branch of al-Qaeda in the province of Idlib. Everybody's changing their names so often, it really sometimes gets very hard to figure out who is fighting who. And apparently sometimes they fight each other. Now, Putin has suggested that the United States is getting ready to sort of recycle the defeated ISIS terrorists. Now, they've been leaving Syria, they're holed up in Iraq, they're not causing any ruckus, and Putin is saying that the U.S. may be hoping these militants could later be used to renew the fight against Syria's President Bashar al-Assad. The U.S. has not given up that agenda. All right, let's take a phone call here. David in Maryland, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
What's your analysis of that? What do you think that a civil war would look like?
Well, first of all, your assessment is very correct. In the first American Civil War, the states still had much of their authority, and the military in each state was loyal to that state government. There was no national standing army. In fact, it was forbidden for the federal government to have one because of the abuse suffered from the British standing army during colonial times. And that's why when the Confederacy broke away, all of the military living in those states basically went with them. Now, some people did sort of switch sides. I mean, Robert E. Lee was apparently approached at one point to head the U.S. War Department. I'm sorry?
He went to West Point.
He went to West Point, and I think he was offered command of the Union Army, but because he himself was from Virginia, he went back home and fought on the Confederate side here. Now, today, obviously, it's different. The U.S. federal government has a major standing army, and they intentionally position their forces away from their home states so that there's no sense of loyalty or closeness for what's going on. And that's why they move them around a lot. Don't want them forming any attachments or roots. And so a civil war, as you describe it, a bunch of good old boys with muskets going up against the U.S. military would be a very bad idea, and that's why I'm trying to discourage it as much as possible. That being said, I think one could view this, shall we say, fight between propaganda and the truth here on the Internet is a form of civil war, a virtual civil war, which I think has many advantages over the old-fashioned kind because people who are not involved in the conflict can walk around doing their business without fear of catching a stray round.
The military leaders could possibly choose sides. I mean, that's the only scenario I can picture where an actual hot civil war could occur. Other than that, I don't see it happening.
No, I don't see it happening, and I don't want to see it happen. I don't want to see an armed revolution in the streets of America. Again, I'm convinced that the U.S. government is headed for a Soviet Union-style collapse, and we're just going to have to be patient and let it happen. And not give the government any excuse to say, oh my goodness, there's rebellion in the land, declaration of national emergency, suspend the Constitution, we've got martial law, and so forth and so on. At some point, the government may fake something like that to try and end the Constitution, take away our guns. They're scared of us. They're very scared of the American people because we don't believe the lies anymore. And that's why they're so angry with the independent media and the Internet, because we've taken away from them their ability to lie with impunity, and they're lost without it because they've gotten along with lies for so many decades, centuries. They don't know any other way to run a government.
All right, Mike, very good. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And we're going to let you go here. Now, getting on back to the war zones. Apparently, according to an article, according to a new report, nearly a third of all the weapons used by ISIS on the battlefield were manufactured in the European Union. And, of course, we know that another large chunk of those weapons were manufactured in the good old U.S. of A. In fact, it was a rather embarrassment for the U.S. government during one of the earlier efforts to claim that Assad was gassing his own people. Somebody took a picture of the gas canister, and you could read on the label. It was a product that was made in the United States of America. Now, moving over to Iran, as you know, Nikki Haley was up at the United Nations screaming and ranting and foaming at the mouth and calling for a global coalition to counter Iran. And Nikki Haley was out there saying basically Iran is fanning the flames of conflict in the region, which I find rather amazing because the U.S. invaded Afghanistan, the U.S. invaded Iraq, the U.S. invaded Libya, the U.S. proxy Saudi Arabia invaded Yemen, the U.S. invaded Syria, but Iran is fanning the flames of conflict? I mean, that's a heck of a whopper. Nikki, if noses really grow when you lie, Nikki Haley's would have like speared somebody in the back of that chamber. Now, Ray McGovern is out there, and he's basically saying that Netanyahu is calling all the shots in this push for a war between the United States and Iran. See, Israel wants their regional rivals smashed. They don't want to do it themselves. Their children are too precious, and they hate to spend money. We'll get the Americans to do it. And they've done it before. Israel was a major driving force for the war against Iraq, because Iraq supposedly had weapons of mass destruction, which turned out to be a lie, just as the claim that Assad was gassing his own people turned out to be a lie, just as all the claims prior to the P5+1 that Iran was building nuclear weapons turned out to be a lie. All fabrication. Remember the laptop of death? It was supposedly a laptop stolen from an Iranian nuclear scientist, and it was full of all these diagrams and charts on how to build a bomb. And then real nuclear weapons experts looked at it and said, this is a joke. These are things that got copied off the Internet and modified, and none of them would actually work. So Israel is pushing us to a war with Iran, and Nikki Haley's fully on board with that. But she didn't really get the traction at the United Nations that she wanted. She probably expected that just like when Colin Powell was waving his little vial of talcum powder at everybody, that people would get upset and say, oh, my goodness, we've got to do something. But basically, Nikki Haley's got a reaction pretty much on the same level as Netanyahu's drawing of the cartoon bomb. And they picked out all these problems. And, of course, Nikki Haley's big selling point was this supposed wreckage of a missile fired from Yemen into Saudi Arabia, which she claimed had been provided by Iran. And the basis of that claim was there was one part on the rocket that was traceable to Iran. The case is made. It's obviously Iranian. Little bit of a problem. There was another part on that same rocket made in America. So obviously Yemen is buying components to build their rockets from any place they can get them. And the fact that it's got an American part or an Iranian part does not contradict the fact that Yemen designed and built this rocket. But Nikki Haley's out there saying, it's Iran, we've got to go kill them. Okay, Nikki, here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the telephones now. Steve Elkins, aloha. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, net neutrality, Mike. I understand it as being kind of the fast lane, slow lane, maybe the real slow lane. It's certainly not the Autobahn like it is in Germany. But my question to you is, recently, Soviet Union, Russia has talked about creating another internet. And I think that's a great idea. I'm wondering the question that I have for you is there anything prohibiting the establishment of another internet here in the United States?
Technically, no, but unfortunately, we're starting to see the internet service providers lobbying local governments to shut down or prohibit community internet systems. Because some towns have started setting up their own community internet because they want better service at lower cost, and the big corporations are saying, no, you can't do that. You're crunching our profits, and we can't allow that. Even though technically the internet itself isn't owned by anybody. It was developed by the Defense Department's Advanced Research Projects Agency at taxpayer expense. But it's nobody's intellectual property. I mean, there's a lot of intellectual property in the various bits of software that are used to run the internet. But it's not like the internet belongs to XYZ. And so, yeah, you can set up an internet. And it's actually very easy to do because the primary functions of the internet are actually very small. And they're very easy to duplicate. I remember when I was working in San Francisco on Day After Tomorrow, I caught wind of a project that was being set up to create a Wi-Fi-based community internet to allow kids who had computers but didn't have internet in their home at the time to have access to the internet for their schoolwork. Of course, that was back when broadband into the home was still very expensive and very poor quality, which we still have here in Hawaii. But yeah, there's no technical reason you can't have multiple internets, and no technical reason they can't talk to each other. But what we're going to see is we know that the internet service providers donated something like $101 million to virtually every member of Congress to basically try and transform the internet into something that they dominate and control and are able to profiteer from. And they're not going to sit still for anybody coming up with an alternative system that is going to cut into their control and profits. So we could easily see, just like they've already banned Kaspersky antivirus software on government computers, they could ban the Russian internet from being available here in the United States of America. And the irony of all of this is, given that we are the nation that invented the internet, right now, we have some of the poorest internet connectivity into the consumer home of any industrialized nation. Japan is already gigabit delivered into the consumer home. I'm promised 300. I'm actually getting 60. And we've fallen way, way behind. We have a lot of people on the internet, but the quality of the internet service is rapidly falling behind the rest of the world. Anyway, Stephen,
thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
Going to have to let you go. Take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. I was looking at the Fox News feed here, and the breaking news is they're about to release the final version of the tax cut bill. Notice they're doing it late on the day on Friday, so that by Monday it's going to be old news and nobody's going to want to say, that's Friday, you know, we've got new news this week, and stop complaining about the bill. But in a nutshell, it looks like it's another pander to the wealthy individuals, wealthy corporations. And interestingly enough, I was seeing a discussion about the tax bill where somebody asked the representative who was basically there to talk about the nuts and bolts of the tax bill, will there be a tax relief for the middle class? And the guy just hemmed and hawed and said, well, we'll have to see. And no, there won't be. This is another classic case of the rich are going to get richer, you are going to be made poorer, you must make do with less so the money junkies can have more. That's the thinking inside this country. All right, we're going to take another phone call here. Linda in Ohio. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. One of my adult children she's had Medical Mutual for 5, 6 years, and they're partnering with Sensio Health to administer a program where a representative will call to a convenient time for a physician to come to your home and conduct a health evaluation. She never uses the system. You know, it's just one of those stopgate methods in case she really, really needs it. Anyway, the physician will ask you about your health history, medical conditions, and of course they offer you a $50 gift to Amazon or Target. But I warned her, and she is scrupulous about this because she doesn't use the medical system usually. And is this something that's coming on the public now? I mean, collecting this information in your home and...
I hadn't heard about it before. I do know that when you're dealing with doctors these days, they are asking some inappropriate questions like, do you have guns in your home? But apparently this is something that the government has ordered them to do in the belief that people trust their doctors enough to tell the truth. And I think most people concerned about their privacy are probably going to just, lie convincingly and get away with it.
Well, I think she's refusing this person to come to her home anyway, a physician yet, huh?
Yeah, I mean, that's so weird. I mean, when I was a kid, doctors did make house calls. But after the Health Maintenance Organization bill, oh, no, they built these huge little facilities and you went there. I think the only doctors who still make house calls are the ones over in Beverly Hills who graduate medical school specializing in diseases of the rich and famous.
Well, she has refused it. I mean, it's enticing when they offer you a $50 Target card or Amazon.
Yeah, that's weird.
They're raising her insurance.
That's very weird.
And $50 increase in the insurance, of course, now monthly.
Yes.
So I just wondered what your insight would be.
Well, this is the first I've heard of that, but it strikes me as very intrusive. Of course, maybe they sent the doctor, I mean, did they give her an opportunity to fill out this information like online or fill out a form and send that in?
No, not at all. There's just the first letter.
Well, I don't know what to tell you then on that one. Anyway, Linda, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Yemen's Ansarullah rejects U.S. claims about Iran's missile aid, basically saying these are missiles that we design and manufacture in our own country. And, of course, Iran has denied supplying the missiles as well. There's no proof. There's no proof. And the fact that Nikki Haley had to get up there and stretch this one Iranian part to make that link tells us there is no real proof that Iran had anything to do with it. Again, it's a repeat of Saddam's nuclear weapons, Assad's sarin gas, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. How many more times are you going to have to be lied to before you understand this government gets us into wars with lies, fraud, and deception? Because they feel it's necessary. I mean, it's not like they could get up there and say, we want to invade this country because they won't sell their oil for the U.S. dollar, and we need to take control of their oil so that our money junkies are going to be happy. Nobody would send their kids to a war described like that. And yet that's exactly what happened. Iraq was all about Saddam's selling Iraq's oil for the euro instead of the dollar. Now, as you know, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation on Wednesday declared East Jerusalem the capital of Palestine, or they recognized East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine. And these are heads of states of nations, which is exactly what Donald Trump is. So it's on a par. If Donald Trump's recognition of Jerusalem is somehow legitimate in international diplomacy, and it isn't, then so is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Netanyahu's only comment about that was their statement fails to impress us. And then he went on to say, the truth will win in the end, and many countries will certainly recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and also move their embassies. So far, every other nation has turned the idea down flat. Now, China has stepped forward, and they're echoing the call to make East Jerusalem the capital of an independent Palestine. Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu are isolated on this one. They're not getting the rest of the world to go along. That's because Donald Trump is no Harry Truman. The fighting is still going on. Apparently, Israeli soldiers attacked earlier today a nonviolent Palestinian procession near the Al-Azhar refugee camp north of the West Bank city of Bethlehem. And basically, a lot of Palestinians were injured by tear gas inhalation, cuts, and bruises. Now, the Palestinians marched from the refugee camp and headed toward the northern entrance of the city while chanting against the ongoing Israeli occupation and escalation and the illegal recognition by the American president of occupied Jerusalem as the capital of Israel in direct violation of international law and the United Nations. So Israel's reaction to that is violence. We're going to do what we're going to do, and if you complain, we will hurt you. Now, Putin is thinking about what's going on in this country. He's watching very closely. And apparently, during his regular year-end press conference, basically came on out saying that Trump's hands are tied, that he realizes Donald Trump, for all of his good intentions, is basically surrounded by an entrenched system that will not let him change anything because they're all profiting handsomely off of that system, and they don't want it to go away. Now, North Korea is warning that the United States is taking a dangerous step toward a potentially nuclear war by seeking a naval blockade. This is from the state news agency KCNA. And yes, a naval blockade of a country is an act of war. It certainly was when they did it to Yemen, and it's certainly going to be the same when they do it to North Korea. Lindsey Graham is out there saying there is now a 30% chance Trump will attack North Korea. And Lindsey is out there saying Trump's going to have to use the military option. Time is running out. Okay, Lindsey, here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. Have fun. Now, Japan has frozen the assets of 19 North Korean companies to step up pressure on North Korea to return Japanese citizens that were supposedly abducted in the 1970s and 1980s, and, oh yes, all halt to its nuclear weapon and missile development. Now, the companies have already been sanctioned by the United States. They deal in finance, coal and minerals, transport, including shipping, and the sending of North Korean workers overseas. And a foreign ministry official said the unilateral move shows Japan's commitment to sanctions ahead of a UN Security Council meeting in New York, apparently later today, to discuss the North Korean situation. Meanwhile, the Chinese Navy has begun live fire drills off the Korean peninsula. And basically, China is taking the position this is in response to all of the South Korean, U.S., Japanese drills taking place in the same area, saying that it isn't just the U.S. that can rattle sabers in that part of the world. And, of course, China is criticizing the U.S. for pushing the region towards what could be a nuclear war. And, yes, it is the United States doing the pushing. Now, China has resumed their military buildup in the disputed Doklam Plateau. Remember, a couple of months ago, there was this standoff between China and India over this road that had been built across the border because it was easier than digging a tunnel, and there was a bit of a standoff about that. But apparently, China is continuing to build up their military in that part of the world. Now, we've been talking about the poor quality of U.S.-made weapons, and now it turns out they're not only deficient, they're sneaky. Norway just took delivery of the first 4 of their F-35 fighter jets. And in working with them, learning how to use them, they discovered these jets are sending sensitive data back to the U.S. manufacturer, Lockheed Martin, and presumably the hands of the government as well. And Norway's concerned because some of that information is not something they want Lockheed Martin or the U.S. government to have. And that is something that probably everybody who's purchasing U.S.-made weapons ought to be thinking about. Is this thing spying on me? We know the U.S. government has turned our computers into spies against us, our cell phones into spies against us, our tablets into spies against us. Wouldn't it make sense that they would engineer the weapons to be spies on behalf of the United States, or even worse, be remotely disabled should the people who are acquiring these weapons decide they don't like the United States anymore? But the F-35 got caught red-handed, sending information back to Lockheed Martin, and that was certainly not something the sales representative mentioned was going to happen when Norway closed the deal. Getting into the economic news, Saudi Arabia has launched a $19 billion stimulus package in a desperate bid to kickstart 2018 growth. And a lot of people are saying maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. With oil prices depressed, Saudi Arabia is in a bit of trouble. And apparently this is what Crown Prince bin Salman is doing with all the money that was taken from the Saudi billionaires who were arrested for corruption, and then they were told, we'll let you out if you give us so much of your money. And apparently this is where they're getting the money to pump back into the economy to try and get it going. May sound a little weird, could actually work. Because there's an old saying that money is like manure. You have to spread it evenly over the field to get any benefit out of it. If you let it pile up in a big pile in one corner, it's just going to sit there and stink. And so what bin Salman has done, apparently, is that he got a whole bunch of manure from these billionaires who were hoarding it all for themselves, and he's spreading it across the country. Or if you want another metaphor, I've been talking about the recycling mechanism to keep an economy healthy, where the money that gets concentrated at the top is somehow recycled back down to the bottom for decent wages and salary and investment into necessary sectors of the economy. And that is another way to look at what bin Salman did. He grabbed the money away from the billionaires, and he's putting it back into the bottom of the Saudi economy. Now, of course, the billionaires are going to scream, you're stealing from us, you're robbing us blind, but if you really think about it, how did they become billionaires? I mean, there are some billionaires who have legitimately earned that place by putting out a good product or making a bunch of movies or something, but we know there are people who are out there who just game the system to gain wealth without returning anything substantive to society. So we'll see what happens. He could actually pull this off. World's second largest clothing retailer, H&M, had a major drop on their stock price. It crashed 15%, the biggest intraday drop since September 11th, as the company reported only its third quarterly sales decline in a decade here. Janet Yellen is going on the warpath on Bitcoin, describing it as a full-blown financial stability risk. In other words, if Bitcoin crashes, there'll be no bailout for the people who get hurt because the banks are not exposed to Bitcoin that we know of. The banks aren't accepting Bitcoin. So they're completely isolated. If there's a crash on Bitcoin, there's no FDIC, there's no bailout coming. And of course the Federal Reserve would like to see Bitcoin and all cryptocurrencies go away because they're competition to that Federal Reserve note that must be borrowed at interest to enter circulation. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog. Dollars days as world's most important currency are numbered, warns an expert. The expert is Barry Eichengreen, and he's saying we're heading toward a world in which currencies are going to coexist on an equal footing in international markets. And the U.S. will be forced to share that market with the yuan, the euro, and the ruble. And, of course, the Federal Reserve does not want that. They want to go back to the glory days of Bretton Woods, where everybody went through the U.S. Federal Reserve note for all cross-border trade and banking, off of which the U.S. economy made a small fee. Now, over in Europe, they're still pounding on the issue of Brexit. Theresa May was dealt a setback when Parliament amended the Brexit bill to include a final go, no-go vote for Parliament itself, with which they could simply reverse the wishes of the British subjects. But there's another breakthrough because Brussels appears to be ready to greenlight the second stage of the talks and move this forward. So we'll see what's going to happen on that one. Now, apparently, along with Facebook, Britain is trying to find some way to blame the Brexit vote on Russia in order to invalidate it. Same reason they're trying to link Trump to Russia to invalidate his election. And the Facebook came back an embarrassment, 72 cents worth of ads that reached 200 people. And basically, Damian Collins, head of the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee of the House of Commons, was leading the inquiry into the matter and approached Twitter about finding evidence of Russian influence. And Twitter came back, said they've spent about $1,000, and Collins said it's an inadequate response. In other words, Twitter refuses to lie for him. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go back to the telephones. Al in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. You said something earlier about the benefits of having the U.S. Federal Reserve note as the world's reserve currency, and you said it was small. It's huge. It allows the United States to export inflation, right? Yes. That is major. I remember being a kid how cheap prices were when I went over the border. I couldn't believe it. Now it's, you know, it's catching up, right? But that, I mean, that's key. That was the whole key behind the United States prosperity and low inflation and an ever-increasing money supply.
Yeah, that was a big part of it. I mean, the post-war years, the baby boomer years, that was a big part of it, the Bretton Woods deal. The other part of it was the United States came out of World War II as the only nation whose industrial base had not been bombed into rubble. And so as the other nations rebuilt, they had to come to the United States to buy machine tools, ball bearings, and so forth and so on.
Absolutely correct. Actually, Canada was right there too, except, you know, at the time, we had the publicly owned Bank of Canada, and the governments would actually go there for interest-free loans. But, you know, there's been some kind of, I don't know if you want to call it conspiracy or some false information around, you know, the internet and that about Canada having like the second or third largest navy, you know, in the world after World War II, and, you know, there was no debt. Well, it's true, there was no debt because of what I mentioned with interest-free loans from the Bank of Canada, but we didn't have, like, the second or third largest navy. You know, they were just, like, small little support ships and all that sort of thing.
Yes.
So, anyway, it was, like, one of the first times I've ever caught you, and, you know, what you said wasn't exactly true. You know, there was a huge benefit for the United States having that U.S. Federal Reserve note as the world's reserve currency.
Well,
and it, you know,
you're right, but I phrased it that way as kind of an attempt at humor. Yet it was a ripoff, and a lot of other countries came to regret it because the reason they went along with Bretton Woods it was based on two promises. First of all, that the Federal Reserve would not just start printing Federal Reserve notes like crazy in order to loot the rest of the world of agricultural produce and manufactured goods for little more than ink and paper. And the second promise was that in order to declare the U.S. dollar as good as gold, it had to be redeemable in gold at, I think the price back then was $32 per ounce. And because the Federal Reserve answers to no government authority, and that's right from Alan Greenspan himself, the Federal Reserve did start overprinting the U.S. dollars. And that was another reason of that post-war boom. it was just nothing but ink and paper, and these other countries were required by the treaty to treat them as if they were something of value. And then in the late 1970s, France, which had survived a CIA attempt to change their government, decided they were going to send back all the ink and paper notes that had piled up in their bank vaults and exchange them for gold. And Richard Nixon looked in the vaults at Fort Knox, realized they didn't have anywhere near enough gold to redeem those notes, and he ended gold convertibility. And that threatened the dollar, and they propped it back up again with the petrodollar deal, and that is sort of how we got to where we are right now.
Yeah, and that cryptocurrency. Oh, there was a write-up, by the way, on the CBC in Canada about Janet Yellen and the cryptocurrency and all that. And I was almost going to send you a link just so you can kind of shoot through the comments. But people are really waking up now. I mean, it's just snowballed. It's snowballed, Mike. It's a beautiful thing. Good. They're actually discovering, the crapola that's been trying to, the crap that's been pulled over their eyes for all these years. And it's, and it really helps when you have a government website that actually says, yeah, guess what? Chartered banks do create the national currency out of thin air. If you go for a loan, a mortgage, whatever, what they do is they deposit, that money into your account, and then off it goes to somebody else, right? It's just right out of thin air. Beautiful. Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate you taking my call.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And the reason that private central banks are so popular is because when they're first started up, all of a sudden there's a lot of money, and things look really good, and things look prosperous. But as you go along and that accumulated debt continues to increase, you will eventually get to a situation where so much money is owed to that private central bank, they come on in and they basically take everything that was built by the people with that earlier money. And everybody who sets up a private central bank knows it's not going to last forever. They can't. They just want to be on that ground floor when it opens on up because they'll get a lot of money, and politicians get a lot of donations. But in the long run, eventually it reaches a point where the debt is going to collapse the system. And now that it's all linked globally, the entire global private central bank network could come crashing down. All right, we're coming up here on another commercial break, and we're going to take a few moments rest, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we take this next phone call, there's a breaking story coming from The Hill, and it's basically reporting that California lawyer Lisa Bloom was apparently securing money for other women to come forward with accusations that Donald Trump sexually assaulted them. And apparently Bloom's efforts included arranging a liberal donor to pay off one of the accuser's mortgage, offering to sell an alleged victim's story to TV outlets, and even trying to secure a six-figure payment for another woman who eventually decided not to come forward with the supposed accusations. Now, one of the Bloom clients who did receive financial help in exchange for her allegations against Trump was New York City makeup artist Jill Harth, who has defended the revelations while claiming that the money has nothing to do with her coming forward in the first place. And, of course, she's now being represented by Gloria Allred. So it is feeling like, building on the supposed success, smear job against Judge Roy Moore in Alabama, that they're going to go after Donald Trump with this. And they're just going to pile so much on him that people are going to say, well, at least some of it must be true. Oh, horrors, 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 horrors. Now, Matt Damon came out with a comment saying that in some cases of sexual harassment, yeah, bad things happen, and the people who did it should be punished appropriately. But he said there's a continuum, meaning some of the stuff is so minor, it's not really just and fair to destroy somebody's career over it. And it's sort of another way of saying something that I was saying, that one man's flirtation is another woman's sexual harassment. You're never really sure anymore. And apparently the snowflakes have turned on poor Matt Damon, and they're screaming, no, even a finger out of place, the man's career and life ought to be destroyed. All right, let's take some phone calls here. Charlie in Indiana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I was just curious if you were aware of that breaking news story they had last night on Michael Rivera's show, Resurrect the Republic, about the BLM and how they had a hit list and things out.
I've heard that there was a hit list out there, but why don't you give us a few more details?
Well, they interviewed a representative from the state of Washington or Oregon, and I believe it was a state representative, and he, went on to say he was not one to commit suicide, and loved his wife, and had no family problems, didn't get into pornography on the internet or nothing like that. So if they ever did anything against him, he would have that, that he didn't do it. But then he turned around and read off a whole lot of stuff about the BLM and the Bundy trial and what happened in Oregon and such, and ended up with basically showing where they had a hit list out for the Bundys and different people that were involved in the Nevada standoff, and that they did have your hot shots sitting up on the thing ready to take anybody out down there in Nevada and all that kind of stuff. Pretty interesting.
Yeah, and unfortunately not all that surprising. We do know there was that one individual that apparently was gunned down by a sniper when the police stopped him on the road, and I'm forgetting the name of the individual, but that definitely came across as a hit.
Well, they had a whistleblower that has talked from the BLM.
Okay.
And he said they had a list of people, like they had pictures of the Hammonds and, the Bundys and them, and had their face on there with a red X on their face, and some people were marked in yellow and others, different colors for the different people, showing who they wanted first, who was the most important, and that kind of stuff, I would imagine.
Okay.
So I just wanted to know if you, if you had heard that, the report last night, and, make sure people understand that this is going on.
Yeah, we have death squads in the United States, and it's an ugly situation. Anyway, Charlie, we're going to let you go. Take another phone call from Sherry in Texas. Aloha, Sherry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. I was listening to what Linda said about getting insurance by a salesman that comes to her home or a nurse or something. Now, I had a friend that her husband got a job selling insurance, and there's something to know when it's just between a salesman and there's no office or doctor or other connection like Blue Cross Blue Shield office or an Aetna office or something, just between you and them. He came, the friend's husband, so I knew him, and came to the house and gave me the sales pitch. Well, I was kind of thinking of getting insurance at that time, so I said, okay, I think I'll do this, because it was really affordable, like just a little over $1,000 a year. Mm-hmm. And the friend's husband got, so he arranged for an RN to come in. Then the RN comes in, and they get like your weight and blood pressure, and they ask about your meds. So far, it's just between you and them. There's no other person here. The trouble with this is I signed up, and it was nice and affordable, but after 2 years, I heard in the news that they got sued because they were rubber stamping doctors' signatures, and the company started with the word Alliance for blank, blank, blank. I don't know if I should mention it, but it's been a good while, almost 30 years. They're probably back. Something similar is probably back now that things have cooled down, but they rubber stamp these signatures and they reject a lot of claims erroneously. So if you were to have a legitimate claim, it's likely that it would get turned down. And this was their MO, to just reject claims and use false means of saying, well, the doctor didn't approve it, when there's no really bona fide doctor. It's all false. So now there is a site on some of our independent media sites. I don't think you have it as a sponsor, but the Power Hour does, and I'll let her look into that. It's a co-op kind of arrangement. You may have heard of it. That really sounds good. I'd love to mention it, but it's not your product. Can I go ahead and mention it?
Yeah, you can go ahead and mention it.
It's libertyoncall.org, and they have this metabid.com where they can check into surgeries to see what a fair cost would be. Also, they have low-cost meds. It's called Good RX, and it's all independent radio listeners, and it kind of, I think well, I'd let them tell her, libertyoncall.org. I'm on Medicare, of course, so
The same for
I
Claire
don't
and
have
I.
anything with that. Yeah, I dropped my B, Mike, so I'm telling, I'm just praying I won't get sick because I'll exit if I do.
Well,
I'll never be able
everybody goes sometime.
That's
Anyway,
it.
listen, we're going to let you go. Thank you for the information.
Thank you.
And, you do have to be very careful, especially with the high cost of Obamacare-compliant insurance policies. There are a lot of companies out there selling lower cost insurance, but it's not compliant with Obamacare, and there's all kinds of complications. And let's be very honest, in these hard economic times, there is a lot of fraud going on in businesses that are simply desperate to stay in business. And the people who are running these companies, they very easily make these moral compromises. Oh, it's okay to cheat my customers. When times are better, I'll make it up to them. And, of course, the times never get better, and the evils are never corrected. So it's just the way it is. All righty. Now then, getting on back to the news here, back to Europe here. The Swedish authorities are admitting they're having trouble keeping track of jihadi returnees. And apparently, due to a lack of supervision, these former foreign fighters are basically walking around freely and maybe contributing to radicalizing others in their already vulnerable environment. So how's that open border thing working out for you there? Now, over in Finland, there is a candidate running for president, Laura Huhtasaari, and she is the candidate of the Eurosceptic Finns party, and she's saying that if she wins, she wants Finland out of the European Union, call it a Fexit. It says the nationalists are going to bounce back, and she wants to tighten immigration rules. So I hope she wins. Meanwhile, over in Chicago, Mayor Rahm Emanuel has unveiled a new ID program that he says is designed to welcome the undocumented community into the city. He's providing a City of Chicago ID for illegal immigrants to use to do whatever it is that they're going to do, like possibly vote. Down in Florida, apparently, after a long fight through the court system, it has now been declared that growing food plants, vegetables, in your own front yard is a criminal offense. And that really is the sign of a dictatorship. I mean, Adolf Hitler didn't walk around telling people they couldn't grow things in the front yard of their own home. But we do it here in the United States of America. Now, Florida says you can grow food crops in your backyard if you want, but they feel that food crops in the front yard, it's unsightly. Not really. There's a lot of food crops that are actually very attractive. What's really going on, of course, is they're trying to keep us all dependent on those large corporate supermarkets. And if people are walking down the street and they're seeing vegetables growing in people's front yards, they're going to say, gee, we ought to do that. We could save a few bucks. And that's why they're trying to crush down this whole idea right now of people growing their own food. They don't want us providing anything that we need. They want everything commoditized and available for a price. But it breaks down when people can't find the jobs to earn the money to buy the food, the water, the medicine, the electricity. And that's what's happening right now. Speaking of Canada, getting on back to that, this is category of political correctness. Canada will not fund student summer jobs unless the employers support abortion. What one has to do with the other, of course, beggars the imagination. But Justin Trudeau's government is saying that any employer will be banned from receiving summer job grants for students if they don't sign an attestation that they agree with not only abortion rights, but transgender rights. I think if I was an employer, I wouldn't bother. Now, here's another story. about how this is really getting weird. Apparently, there is a push in schools, primary schools in Great Britain, to have a curriculum that celebrates transgender people. And primary schools are being told they need to stock books and learning resources that celebrate transgender people. This is new government-backed guidelines released by the National Association of Head Teachers. And the document was drawn up specifically to advise schools on how best to make transgender staff, students, and pupils with transgender parents feel positively represented in lesson content and welcomed in the school environment. Whatever happened to reading, writing, and arithmetic? I'll tell you what happened to them. Education has become indoctrination, and above that, it's a racket. We've been talking about all these poor kids who are told, go to college, get a degree, you'll get a high-paying job, you can pay back those student loans. And it didn't work out. The jobs aren't there. Not only that, the degrees they're getting don't really have any value in the real world. And so there was this article over in Zero Hedge about 37 examples of real college courses being offered out there. Okay, Vampires, Evolution of a Sexy Monster, that's at the University of Kentucky. Saints, Witches, and Mad Women, University of Nebraska. Leaning In, Hooking Up, Harvard. Campus Sex in the Digital Age, Washington and Lee University. The Politics of Ugly, the University of Pennsylvania. The F Word and the Public Body, Princeton University. Hip-Hop, Feminism, University of Illinois. Marriage in the Age of Trump, Davidson College. Medieval Sexuality, Northwestern University. Zombies, Modern Myths, Race, and Capitalism, DePaul University. I'm going to skip on down here. Let's see. Rednecks, Queers, and Country Music, University of Michigan. Transnational Sexualities, University of Minnesota. And it just goes on here. Let's see. Rainbow Cowboys and Girls, Gender, Race, Class, and Sexuality in Westerns, Wesley College. Queering the Bible, Swarthmore College. It's amazing here. Deconstructing Masculinities, Bowdoin College. And other things are classes like What If Harry Potter is Real, Appalachian State University. God, Sex, Chocolate, Desire, and Spiritual Faith, UC San Diego. Gaga for Gaga, Sex, Gender, and Identity, University of Virginia. Philosophy and Star Trek, Georgetown. Who invented languages, Klingon and Beyond, the University of Texas. I mean, this is what is being offered in colleges and universities. Nobody's going to get a job with that. They come out with a degree. They've been given a lot of courses that may be fun, hopefully are fun, but they're not worth that money they had to borrow and now have to pay back at interest because the jobs aren't there, and certainly you can't get a job with degrees in those particular areas of study. Education needs to be refocused back on what young people need to be a contributing part of the nation's economy in the future. Science, engineering, math, good language skills, the ability to write and present, the ability to think and reason and analyze. And that's missing from our current college landscape. Now, over in Great Britain, orders have been handed down that traditional depictions of mothers will be banned in commercials. It will now be illegal to show a woman who is feeding her kids at home or ironing clothes or anything like that. They're trying to get rid of harmful gender stereotypes. It's not a stereotype if women want to be stay-at-home mothers and take care of their kids.
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.